Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we're creating a simple confetti animation directly in Procreate. So what you see on screen is exactly what we're going to be creating together. The color palette is free as always. Just tap on the link in the video description. You can download and install it. I'm using two brushes for this, and both of them are part of my Font Lovers brush set, and I'll leave a link in the video description to that as well. I'm going to create a brand new canvas that's 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels at 300 dpi. I work in the display P3 color profile, but if you're on an older iPad and don't have access to that, then the default sRGB color profile is perfectly fine. I've got my brand new canvas all ready to go, and the first thing we're going to do is write out our lettering. And if you're not comfortable lettering, then you can use typable text if you'd rather use that. Okay, so in my Font Lovers brush set, I'm going to use the mono marker brush for the lettering, and the color I'm using is this first teal color, and I'm just going to write out the word celebrate or any phrase that you would like. Okay, I'm going to center this up on my canvas. If you have uniform selected and your snapping is toggled on right here, then you'll see those crosshairs appear once your lettering is centered. The next thing I'm going to do is create a guide for all the sections of my confetti. So as it animates, it's going to start in the center and then it's going to slowly come out. So I'm going to give myself guides to help myself as I'm drawing it for each frame of the animation to know where I'm drawing it. So I'm going to use black for this, that way I can see it really well. And you can use any brush that you'd like. This is just a template or a guide. So I know I'm going to start in the very center. That's where my confetti is going to start, and then it's going to come out. So this is like basically a bullseye, and this can be super rough. It does not have to be perfect, but now I have an idea of how it's going to animate out. So this is just going to stay on top of everything. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this. I'm coming down to like 50. Well, we can go even lower than that. Let's go to 30%. And let me just label this one template. So now we're going to start animating everything. And in order to do that, we need to open up our animation assist palette. So you're going to come over here to the wrench and go to canvas and then toggle on animation assist. Down here is where we're going to control the animation and everything that goes along with it. So this is a pretty beginner friendly animation tutorial. So I'm going to walk you through as if maybe you've never created an animation before, so anyone will be able to follow along. So we can set elements as part of our animation that never change. All of these down here are our frames. So as it cycles through, it's going to go through all the frames, which we are going to define by using our layers palette. But I want the word celebrate to always be a part of the animation. No matter what's changing around it, I always want it to be there. So in order to tell this animation, everything's going to change around it, but keep the word in the same place every single time, I can define it as a background element. And the only way I can do that is if it is sitting right here, right above my background color layer. So because it's sitting there, I can define it as a background element. So right down here, you can see when I select this layer, it matches up down here. If I tap on this little thumbnail, I can toggle on background. And now my lettering will stay there no matter what happens around it. This guide template up here, I want it to stay present as I'm creating the animation, but I can always delete it later, so it doesn't matter. But in order to make sure that stays present throughout my entire animation, I'm going to define that as a foreground element. So you can see with this one toggled on, this is selected right here. So I'm going to tap on this and choose foreground. And now that's a foreground element. And when I export my animation in the end, I can get rid of it by either deleting it or just unchecking it and it'll go away. But I need it here as I'm working. I'm actually going to make this even lighter. It still seems really dark to me. Come down to like 12%. That's better. I'm going to come back to my lettering layer, create a brand new layer above it. And when I create the brand new layer, a new frame is created down here. And you can see the frame matches the layer. So that's how you always know where you are in your layers palette and the frames of your animation. So for this very first frame, I'm going to start with a little tiny cluster of confetti right in the middle where I've drawn the bullseye. So I'm going to start with my pink color and I'm going to use my chunky marker brush. And the size of my chunky marker brush is 15%. And actually, I'm going to come down even smaller. Let's come down to 10%. And I'm going to draw just a few dots, and they can extend beyond it just slightly, but I'm basically just staying in the parameters of this little bullseye that I made. And now I'm going to change colors. I'm going to put some yellow in here and I can put in some blue too. Okay, so this is the first frame of my animation. Now I'm going to create a brand new layer right above it, and this is going to be the second frame of my animation. You can see that even though I'm on this layer, I can still see this layer, but the opacity changed. That is to help guide me along so I know where my previous frame ended. That way I can draw my next parts. That way they can kind of intertwine as I'm working along. This opacity is too dark for me though. I want whatever I'm drawing to be much darker so I can tell them apart a lot better. And I can change that by just hitting settings, and where it says onion skin opacity, I like bringing this down to like 30%. That makes it a lot easier for me to work. For the sake of recording this on screen so you can still see it and follow along, I'm going to bump this up to 40%, but I still wanted it lighter than the default. Okay, so now I'm on my second confetti area. So with that selected, I'm just going to repeat the exact same thing I did, only this time I'm going to paint kind of in the middle of this next ring. And you can put as much confetti in here or as little as you would like. Just keep in mind that if you make this really dense, it's just going to take a while for every frame that you do. I'm just making sure this is spread out pretty evenly here, and then create a brand new layer. I'm going to repeat it again, and then we're going to preview our animation. That way you can kind of see what's going on. It helps to have a few layers in here before we test it. So now I'm following right along the line, the second ring. So I kind of go like inside of this first ring because it's super tiny, but then I go in the middle of the next ring on the line of that ring. Then I'm going to go to the middle, the line, the middle, the line. That way we have a bunch of frames. That way the animation feels more seamless. Because if I just jump between rings every time, it's going to make the animation seem really jumpy. And I don't want that to happen. I want it to be really nice and smooth, like the confetti is exploding. And it's totally fine if I paint some that's in where the other pieces already were. It'll actually make the transition kind of smooth. So I try and do that. But it's also okay to extend a little further, but I'm just keeping those parameters in mind. Okay, so now that we've got 3 layers, we can preview this. We can temporarily turn off our template layer. That way everything's nice and clean as we preview it. And down here, you're going to see this cycle through the frames, but it's going to go super fast because the default frame rate is 15, and that means it's going to cycle through 15 frames per second, which is crazy fast when you only have a few frames. So we're going to reduce this way down, that way we can actually see what's going on. I'm going to come down to 6 frames per second, and we can increase this once we have more frames. Then it won't be as ridiculous, but because we have such a limited amount of frames, this is nice as a first test. And loop just means it's going to cycle through, and then it's going to come back and cycle through and cycle through. This is the way that your animation is going to play. A ping pong means it's going to cycle through, and then it's going to go backwards. So it's like it's creating it, and then it's undoing it back and forth. And then one shot just means it's going to play it through, and then it's just going to be done. But we want this to endlessly, infinitely loop. So that's why loop is selected. Everything else is all good, so let's preview this. Hit play, and now you can see how it's exploding out of there, and that's exactly how we want it to feel. And if we increased our frame rate, that way you can see what I was talking about. So the default was 15, so you can see how nuts that is. It's really hard to kind of understand what's happening until you have more frames in there. So we'll just bring it down. So now that we know what it looks like, we can pause it at any time, and you can see it paused on this frame. So it matches up in your layers palette with that layer. So we're going to continue where we left off. We have to turn on our template layer, and we're just going to keep creating new layers, do the exact same thing. So I'll speed up the video. I'm doing the same thing that we just did, following my guide as I go along. Create a new layer every single time you switch which part of the ring you're drawing the new confetti on. Okay, I've got all of my confetti drawn in now, and it's time to preview it. So I'm going to turn off my template and hit play. So that's super fun. All right, so once you have your animation and you're happy with how it has come out, I'm going to hit pause right here. Now we're going to choose what frame rate we want to export it at, and we're going to talk about exporting it. So under settings, I actually like the animation speed of this. Feels pretty good at 9, so I think I'm going to keep it there, but let's just preview some other frames per second settings. So this is 16, way too fast. Let's bring it down to 10 and see what that looks like. That also still feels really good. I think I'm going to go with 10 for this. So I'll hit pause. And now if you are ready to export it, it's important to consider where you plan to export it to. If you plan on posting it to Instagram, Instagram requires it to be an animated MP4, not an animated GIF. If you want to do an animated GIF, that's more appropriate for like websites. But for Instagram specifically, you have to export it as an animated MP4. If you export it as an animated GIF, it's going to show up as just a static image. It won't play at all. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to show you how to export this for Instagram, but same exact directions if you're exporting it as an animated GIF for a different purpose. So what you're going to do is come up here to the wrench and you're going to hit share. And down here is where animated MP4 is. The other thing that you need to know is whenever you are posting to Instagram, if you're posting a video like this, a looping video, it has to be at least 3 seconds long or it will not play. You won't be able to upload it. So what I like to do is I export it so I can see how long my animation is, and then there's a few things that we can do to make it a longer animation. I already know that this is definitely not 3 seconds. If we watch it play all the way through one cycle from start to finish, that's not even a second long. There's no way that that's 3 seconds. But we can do a few things to make it longer, and there's one in particular that I want to share with you that works really well in a situation like this. So the first thing you can do is just reduce your frame rate. If you make it a slower animation to begin with, it will obviously be longer. But if we like our 10 frames per second under our settings, if we want to keep that speed, there are some other things we can do. We can either pause at the end of the animation and make that a little bit longer if we wanted to, but that doesn't really seem like it would work here. So what I'm going to do is take all of these frames, and you can see how it loops through. It goes through all of them and then comes back and goes through all of them again. So the animation down here, it's going from here all the way to the top, and then it comes back down and plays it again. So if I duplicate all of these, it will automatically make my frames more frames for my animation, even though it's doing the exact same thing that the animation is doing. Because it'll have more frames, it will actually lengthen the time of the animation. So it's a really nice workaround if you need to extend something that you're already happy with and you don't want to change any of the settings or the frame rate. So in order to do that, you can either copy each one of these individually, but I'll show you a faster way to do it. So I'm going to select all of these, hit group, and now I'm going to duplicate the group. So duplicate it, and just to be safe, I'm going to make 4 copies because then I'll know for a fact that this is definitely going to be long enough. So slide it to the left, duplicate, slide it to the left, duplicate. So now I've got 4 cycles of that, but you can see it's only showing 4 frames. Whenever you group elements together, it becomes 1 frame instead of all of the layers that were within it. So now we need to ungroup all of these. It's a little annoying, but it totally works. So we're going to start with the first group first. We'll just select all the contents of the group, so slide them all to the right and now drag them right above that group, and that pulls it out of the group. And now you can see this new group doesn't contain anything, and I can just slide it to the left and hit delete. So that's how to ungroup items in Procreate. So now I'm just going to do the exact same thing for these other groups. Drag them above, and then I can delete the group. Drag them above. Just make sure, like, if this turns blue, you don't want to add it to other groups or put it back in the same group. Just make sure nothing turns blue when you're dragging it, where it's going to place it somewhere else you don't want it to go. Okay, slide this to the left, delete. Okay, so now you can see we've got all these frames now, but it's going to behave the exact same way that it was to start with, and we can preview that. So let's hit play. You can see it's just cycling through, and then it's going to start over again. And that does feel like it could be 3 seconds long. So we're going to export it and just double check that to make sure. And if it is 3 seconds long, then you're good to go with posting it to Instagram. So I'm going to hit pause. We're going to come up here to the wrench, go to share, and let's choose animated MP4. Over here, choose max resolution. If you do web ready, it does funky things to it, but it'll be totally fine. There's nothing wrong with keeping it at max resolution here. And you can still adjust your frames per second, which is pretty cool. So if you get to this point and you decide you want it to be a little faster, a little slower, you can still adjust it right here. But I like the 10 frames per second, so I'm going to keep it. So then you just hit export. And then down here, you're just going to hit save video, and that will save it to your camera roll. Okay, we're in my camera roll, and down here, it's kind of hard to see, but right in the corner, it'll show you how long your animation is, and mine is 4 seconds, so I know that it's good to go for Instagram. So that's how to create a basic confetti animation directly in Procreate. Once again, everything mentioned in this tutorial are right in the video description, including the free color palette and those brushes. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified of new tutorials just like this one in the future. For more Procreate tutorials and freebies, head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com. You can also find me over on Instagram. My handle is everytuesday. If you try this out and post it there, I would love it if you tag me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.